Hey everyone, and welcome to another Weekly Wisdom. It's Natalia Eileen, founder and CEO of C Network. And every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern, we like to bring to you a diversity, equity, and inclusion tip or trick specifically designed to help you create a more inclusive workplace environment for all of your employees. And the goal with these sessions, these weekly wisdoms, is to give you some actionable tips that you can take with you in under 10 minutes every Wednesday morning. So today's topic, we hope, will follow that trend and give you some actionable things to think about as a leader. Because specifically today, we're talking about 4 ways effective leaders can slip out of self-care mode. Now, hopefully we're in agreement that self-care is deeply important for everyone. And that includes leaders, because if we're not putting self-care on our list of priorities, and I would argue toward the top of our list of priorities, we may be affecting our effectiveness. We may be negatively impacting that effectiveness as a leader with our teams, within our workplaces, within our households, and generally as we strive to meet the goals that we've set for ourselves as human beings. And so these are 4 ways that you might slip out of that goal of keeping self-care top of mind. And these are actually inspired by a Harvard Business Review article that came out in 2017. This Harvard Business Review article is called 6 Ways to Weave Self-Care into Your Workday. And if you haven't had a chance to review this article, it is well worth your time, because as it promises, it absolutely gives you 6 suggestions for how you can integrate self-care into your everyday. And I find this to be super helpful, especially in keeping with the topic of the month, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. Toward the end of this article, there are also several ways that leaders can sometimes fall prey to slipping out of self-care mode. And what we want is to try to keep ourselves in self-care mode as much as possible so that we're able to show up at work and everywhere else in our lives as effectively as possible. So in that article, they do go over these 4 ways that leaders sometimes slip, and I want to go over those with you just in case you haven't had a chance to see those yet. So let's get started with our first way that leaders sometimes slip out of self-care mode. And the first is perhaps the one that I always have to keep in mind. And perhaps it's the case for you too, that self-neglect is something that can come up for a lot of us who are used to putting others first, or who are used to doing as much as possible on our lists, and sometimes find ourselves putting ourselves and our needs toward the bottom. So we want to make sure that with competing priorities, as we all have as leaders, that we are not allowing our self-care and our needs to fall toward the bottom of the list. That is one of the mistakes we often see when leaders are managing a whole bunch of different priorities. They might put themselves toward the bottom. Now, raising awareness about this and other potential slips can really help you avoid those. And that's the goal here today, and the tip that I want to make sure you're taking with you as you move into this week. The second way we see leaders often fall into or out of self-care mode is by maybe relying a little too much on self-management. So self-management is when you're working hard to maintain your professional persona. And this is something that we all might be familiar with, right? We have a certain role that we play when we come into the workplace. Sometimes we might find ourselves really navigating how we show up to work, making sure that we show up to work in a way that is comparable with our goals and our vision for what leaders can look like, or in some cases we think should look like. Now, that is fine and something a lot of people do. However, it can get in the way if we end up self-managing too much and find that we're not then paying attention to ourselves, our values, our needs, and our emotions. And that is very similar to the third pitfall that we see, where we can sometimes allow those values, those goals, our ambitions, and our needs to fall by the wayside because of self-sabotage. This is when we might not even realize it. It might be unconscious, but sometimes when we're under pressure, we slip into unproductive habits. Perhaps we're not sleeping at the right time because we're finding ourselves scrolling through those social media apps that we have on our phone. Or maybe we're doing things like skipping that workout routine that we know goes a long way to making us feel healthy and supported on a regular basis. Now, sometimes this is something that's just due to the pressure and the stress that's happening. We find we have to make certain trade-offs, but when we do this consistently, this might be falling in the category of self-sabotage, and it might be helpful to think about whether or not this is something you're slipping into right now. Good news is you can correct this and you can get back into self-care mode now that you've become aware of this potential slip and the fact that you might have fallen into it. Here is the fourth way that many effective leaders fall into, or out of rather, self-care mode: self-preservation. This is something that we might find in very competitive environments. We might also find it when we just have people who are very ambitious, very interested in getting to the top of their ladder, the top of their their organization. And while that is wonderful, sometimes that tunnel vision, self-preservation, that goal setting can get in the way of us getting in touch with our needs and our values and our self-care practices. Again, these are the 4 ways that you might slip out of self-care mode. And as effective leaders, we need to make sure that we are in self-care mode as much as possible. So I wanted to make sure that we put these on your radar so that you can try your best not to let yourself fall into these traps. Again, here they are. We have self-neglect, self-management, self-sabotage, and self-preservation. And all of these are inspired by the Harvard Business Review article, 6 Ways to Weave Self-Care into Your Workday. I recommend you take a look at it. It's from 2017, which at this point was quite a few years ago, but self-care is timeless. With that, I want to make sure we close out before our 10-minute mark, because that's our commitment to you. We give you these strategies in less than 10 minutes. And these strategies are among the many that we support leaders with through some of our services. So consider working with us if this is of interest to you. We have inclusive leadership training that we offer to leaders, and we have offered to thousands of leaders around the world. We have these workshops that can be done in 3 hours, in 90 minutes. We've done them on full days, in person, virtually, and we've also done several follow-on sessions and coaching group sessions around inclusive leadership practices, some of which suggest that self-care is paramount, and getting in touch with your values and desires as a leader can go a long way to helping you do this well. You can visit us at cnetwork.com/workshops. You can also stay in touch with us by finding us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're obviously also on YouTube, and you can find us or follow us further by following our newsletter at cnetwork.com/newsletter. And you can also, if you are interested in these inclusive leadership offerings, you can also schedule a consultation and meet up with us to learn more about how we can work together. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And with that, we'll close out this week's Weekly Wisdom, and we'll see you next week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Thanks, everyone.